Andronikos II hired mercenaries, only to watch as they pillaged his empire. That single decision, outsourcing survival to men with no stake in Byzantium's future, set a pattern that would devour the Palaiologan dynasty from the inside. What began as a desperate attempt to hold the frontiers hardened into a habit, buying time with promises the treasury couldn't keep, trading legitimacy for short-term muscle, and inviting foreign arbiters into family disputes. John V. Palaiologos inherited that fragility as if it were law. Every choice he made, crowning deals, conversions, humiliations, was constrained by a shrinking tax base, a divided court, and an Ottoman state that learned to treat Byzantine crises as opportunities. By the time Sultan Murad I measured Constantinople's politics like a ledger, betrayal was no longer a moral failing. It was the operating system. The empire John V inherited was still called Roman, but it no longer behaved like a superpower. On paper, the emperor ruled from Constantinople. In practice, he negotiated with creditors, rival claimants, and generals who could switch sides in a single night. The court could stage a coronation, but it could not reliably pay an army to enforce it. Each province that slipped away did more than reduce territory. It reduced options, and in Byzantium, reduced options meant someone, somewhere, would force a decision with a knife at the throat. John V became emperor as a child in 1341, and that fact alone created a vacuum people rushed to fill. A regency around his mother, Anna of Savoy, claimed to guard the throne. John VI Cantacuzenos, once the late emperor's chief advisor, claimed the regency was a coup in slow motion, in a private council where seals and signatures mattered more than swords. Cantacuzenos was denounced. He answered by having himself proclaimed emperor by his supporters. Two emperors now existed on the strength of competing oaths. The empire's greatest enemy wasn't across a border. It was the precedent that a throne could be duplicated. Civil war is not only armies, it is paperwork, taxation, and the right to command garrisons. Cities and magnates chose sides because neutrality meant being punished by whoever won. To raise soldiers, both factions leaned on outsiders. Serbian and Bulgarian rulers extracted concessions. Turkish beys in Asia Minor were paid and promised access. Each contract solved an immediate problem: one siege, one march, one payroll, and quietly transferred leverage to people who did not fear Constantinople. Then catastrophe arrived in a form no faction could negotiate with: plague. As the Black Death crossed the region, it reduced manpower and revenue simultaneously shrinking. The pool of soldiers and the tax base that paid them. That made the war more dependent on mercenaries and foreign allies, exactly the kind of forces that treated Byzantine territory as a source of payment. The structural trap tightened. The less Byzantium could defend itself, the more it needed help. The more help it took, the less sovereignty it retained. In 1347, Cantacuzenos entered Constantinople and forced a settlement. The agreement made him senior emperor and John V Jr., an arrangement meant to stop the bleeding. It did not, because the real contest wasn't ceremonial precedence, it was who controlled appointments, fortresses, and customs revenue. Even after the peace, supporters of each side watched for chances to reverse it. During these years, a critical piece of geography, Gallipoli, was lost to the rising Ottoman power. Chroniclers would later argue about whether it was given as payment or simply taken after an earthquake damaged defenses. But the consequence was the same: an Ottoman bridgehead in Europe. The straits were no longer a moat. They were a corridor. Every Byzantine factional struggle after that point unfolded under the shadow of an enemy that could cross quickly and profitably. John V eventually pushed Cantacuzenos aside, asserting sole rule in the 1350s. Yet sole rule did not mean secure rule. It meant he alone carried the impossible math. Asia Minor was largely gone. The countryside around the capital could not reliably be taxed without armed escorts. The empire's remaining strength lay in diplomacy walls and the prestige of the imperial title, prestige that could still open doors in Italy, in the papal court, and among rival maritime republics. John V's problem was that prestige did not pay for soldiers and walls could not counter a blockade or a cutting of supply lines. Across the water, the Ottomans were changing from a frontier principality into a state that could exploit exactly this kind of weakness. When Murad I came to power in the early 1360s, he inherited not only troops but a method: turn enemy divisions into Ottoman advantages. He pushed into Thrace, captured Adrianople, Edirne, and made it a center of power close enough to pressure Constantinople, far enough to be defensible. This was not just conquest, it was repositioning. Byzantium's capital now lived beside an enemy capital in waiting. Murad's leverage wasn't merely his army, it was his ability to decide which Byzantine claimant would live, which would be exiled, and which would be reinstated under terms. He could accept tribute one year and sponsor a rebellion the next, not out of whim, but out of strategy. A Byzantine emperor who needed help to defeat his own relatives could be turned into a vassal without a formal annexation. John V tried the remaining tool available, Western aid, but Western aid came with a price that cut into legitimacy at home: religion. In 1369, John traveled to Rome and made a public profession of Catholic faith, seeking military support. The act was a signal, staged in the most visible way possible. An emperor, heir to Orthodox Constantinople, binding himself to the Pope's authority in hopes of buying salvation. It was also a gamble against his own political base. Many of his subjects saw union with Rome as surrender, not diplomacy. And even among potential Western backers, the response was transactional. Sympathy did not automatically become fleets and armies. John returned with little concrete support and a damaged reputation. The worst possible combination for a ruler whose authority depended on appearing chosen by God and necessary to survival. Murad did not need to debate theology, he needed results. The Ottoman advance continued, fed by the conversion of captured land into revenue and soldiers. In 1371, a major Serbian defeat at the Maritsa River shattered another potential buffer. Each Balkan power that fell or submitted reduced Byzantium's strategic depth. Constantinople was becoming an island without water, surrounded, supplied only by what others allowed to pass. Under this pressure, John V accepted a vassal-like relationship to the Ottomans, tribute, obligations, and the humiliating logic that the emperor might be required to assist the sultan's campaigns. The exact terms could shift, but the core reality was visible in every embassy and every demanded payment. The emperor who once crowned kings was now negotiating for permission to remain on his throne. That humiliation created the next crisis inside the palace. John V's son, Andronikos IV, had his own survival calculation. If Byzantium's future was submission, then the fight was no longer about saving an empire. It was about who would be the Sultan's preferred client. In 1373, Andronikos rebelled against his father. Almost simultaneously, Murad faced a revolt by his own son, Savsi Bey. The symmetry was chilling. Fathers and sons, in two dynasties, testing whether blood or power was the binding rule. The rebellions failed, and punishment became political theater. John V blinded Andronikos partially enough to disqualify him in theory, not enough to remove him as a symbol. Murad executed or harshly punished his son. The message in both courts was the same: succession would not be decided by sentiment. Yet even in defeat, Andronikos learned a lesson that would define the next decade. Rebellion did not have to win to extract concessions. It only had to create chaos others would pay to stop. John V tried to restabilize the line of succession by elevating another son, Manuel, as co-emperor and heir. That decision was meant to close the door on Andronikos. But in Byzantium, closing doors often meant creating new enemies outside the room. Andronikos, embittered and threatened, looked for the one patron who could override Constantinople's internal rules, the Ottoman Sultan. In 1376, the betrayal matured into a coup. Andronikos IV escaped confinement and secured support. Ottoman backing and likely crucial naval help entangled in the rivalries of Genoa and Venice, whose commercial empires fed on Byzantine weakness. The mechanics mattered. A claimant needed ships to control the straits and money to pay guards. When those arrived, legitimacy could be manufactured quickly. John V was seized and imprisoned, reportedly with Manuel, while Andronikos took the throne. The visual of the empire's reality was brutally simple. The reigning emperor behind locked doors while his son sat in the palace, issuing orders in his name. Authority had become custody. Andronikos did not rule as a free emperor. He ruled as the product of a bargain. To pay his debts and keep his patrons satisfied, he offered what could not be replaced. In this period, Byzantium's remaining strategic points, fortresses, customs rights, and islands, became chips. Control of Gallipoli and other positions could be confirmed or transferred to please Murad and secure Andronikos's fragile reign. Each concession reduced Byzantium's ability to resist the next demand, whether from the Sultan or from the Italian powers that treated imperial desperation as a business model. John V's countermove was forced by the same logic. If betrayal had external sponsors, restoration required them too. From prison and exile, he negotiated, promising payments, confirming privileges, and appealing to those who feared Andronikos's alignment. In 1379, with foreign assistance again, John V regained the throne, but restoration was not recovery. It was another contract signed under duress. The settlement that followed made the dynasty a permanent battlefield. Andronikos was not eliminated. He was granted a subordinate appanage and recognized as a legitimate figure, while Manuel's position remained contested. The empire now carried inside its own legal framework a sanctioned rival center of authority. Murad did not have to conquer Constantinople to control it. He only had to keep the Palaiologoi at each other's throats and intervene as the indispensable referee. This is where Murad's statecraft becomes as important as his victories. The Ottomans expanded through sieges and battles, yes, but also through dependency. When a Byzantine emperor needed troops to put down a relative, he paid tribute. When he needed permission to travel or to fortify, he asked. When he needed to confirm a succession, he calculated what the Sultan would accept. Murad's court became, in effect, a shadow chancery for Byzantine politics. Even moments that looked like Byzantine initiative often reinforced Ottoman dominance. When John V attempted to repair walls or negotiate Western loans, he was still constrained by the fact that any improvement in Constantinople's defenses could be treated by Murad as hostility, triggering retaliation, or support for a new claimant. When John disciplined a rebel faction harshly, he risked pushing them into Murad's arms. Mercy encouraged further disloyalty. Punishment encouraged foreign sponsorship. The emperor's choices were all losing choices, separated only by timing. Two brief contested notes sharpened the tragedy. Some later voices framed John V's religious submission to Rome as either noble realism or disgraceful surrender. But the practical outcome is hard to escape. The West's aid remained limited and conditional, while the damage to internal cohesion was immediate. Likewise, whether particular fortresses were ceded voluntarily or taken by force changes the moral story, not the strategic one. Ottoman positions in Europe consolidated, and Byzantium's capacity to reverse them disappeared. As the year 1380s advanced, Murad's campaigns tightened the ring. The Ottoman victory at Kosovo in 1389, where Murad was killed but Ottoman momentum continued, showed that even the Sultan's death did not disrupt the machine he built. That machine was now larger than one ruler, a system capable of absorbing shocks and continuing expansion. Byzantium, by contrast, remained a system that turned every shock into a succession crisis. John V died in 1391, with the empire reduced to a capital, a few scattered territories, and a dynasty trained by decades of trauma to see politics as a series of hostage negotiations. The father's reign ended as it began, under constraint, bargaining against time, watched by rivals at home and a hegemon across the straits. The lasting consequence of John V's entanglement with Murad I was not merely lost land. It was a change in how power worked in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Ottomans demonstrated that conquest could be accelerated by managing the legitimacy crises of neighbors, by turning dynastic conflict into a tool of expansion. Byzantium's internal betrayals were not side plots to decline. They were the mechanism that allowed an external empire to grow without always paying the full price of assaulting walls. A son's rebellion did more than humiliate a father. It taught the Sultan that Constantinople could be steered from within, and it taught the Palaiologoi that survival might depend on becoming useful to the very force replacing them. The Roman Empire did not simply fall to cannon in 1453. It was hollowed out earlier, when emperors learned to treat sovereignty as a negotiable clause, and when sultans learned to write the terms.